I pulled up to my parents' house just as the sun was setting, its orange glow spilling across the wide front porch that had always seemed more welcoming from the outside than it felt inside. The smell of roast chicken drifted out as I stepped through the door, familiar yet oddly distant. Everything looked polished, just like it always did when guests were expected. Napkins folded into triangles, candles unlit but ready, the dining table stretching long enough for 8. When I slid into my usual seat halfway down the table, I noticed right away that my glass was filled with water while everyone else's had been poured wine. A small detail, but one that stung. My father was already holding court, retelling for the third time how last year's celebration for my sister had set the standard. "You remember the look on everyone's face when that chocolate fountain started flowing?" he said, puffing his chest as though he had orchestrated the entire thing. Mother beamed, nodding. "People still talk about it. That's what happens when you do things right." I stayed quiet, folding my napkin in half and laying it across my lap. The same refrain played in my head. 10 years. 10 years of planning, paying, making sure everything went smoothly, always for them. Dinner carried on with chatter about linens, flowers, and what theme would impress the neighbors this time. My sister Sofonisba leaned across the table, her bracelets jingling. "This year," she said, "I want something that sparkles, not just pretty, something unforgettable." Halfway through the meal, my mother slid a thick folder across the table, stopping right in front of me. A platinum credit card was tucked under the flap like a paperweight. "You're so organized, sweetheart," she said with a smile that was more command than compliment. "We trust you with all the details again." My father chuckled as if to lighten the demand. "Use your card for now. I'll pay you back." He winked, as though it were an inside joke. The folder felt heavier than paper as I pulled it closer, the weight of a decade pressed between its pages. Clippings, color swatches, vendor receipts, the exact same routine as every year. My hands trembled slightly under the table. I thought of the year I canceled a dinner with friends at the last minute because the DJ my sister had booked suddenly dropped out. I'd spent the evening cold-calling replacements until midnight. I remembered missing a work bonus dinner because I was rushing to pick up flowers my father swore he'd handle but never did. I even remembered the year I paid a caterer with my own savings, money I never saw again. "Trust is earned, not demanded," I said quietly, almost under my breath. No one heard me over the clinking of silverware. The evening stretched on, full of laughter that never seemed to reach my end of the table. Then my sister leaned back, tossing her hair like she was on stage. "Honestly," she said, smirking, "you're basically our event planner. Maybe you should start charging us." Laughter bubbled around the table. My aunt covered her mouth with her napkin. My father slapped the table with amusement. I smiled politely, but inside the words burned. An event planner without a paycheck. That's what I am to them. I looked down at my plate, pushing a piece of chicken across it, careful not to let my expression slip. Families like mine often crown one child the responsible one, the reliable one, and then use that reliability until it's worn thin. To the others, it sounds like praise. To me, it felt like chains. The conversation carried on as if nothing had happened. My sister pulled out her phone, scrolling through pictures of a venue she wanted, while my parents nodded in approval. I stayed quiet, memorizing every word, every laugh, every dismissal. When the plates were cleared and the table reset for dessert, my mother returned from the kitchen holding a small envelope. She handed it to me almost as an afterthought. "Here, dear," she said casually, "an early birthday card for you." I opened it and immediately noticed the faint outline of another name crossed out beneath mine. The ink used for my name was a different shade, hastily written. The card itself was a generic floral design, edges slightly worn. "It's the thought that counts," she said, smiling as if she had offered me a treasure. My sister stifled a laugh, her shoulders shaking as she leaned back in her chair. I forced my lips into a curve, but inside humiliation pressed like a stone in my chest. 10 years of paying for everyone else's happiness. And this is what I get. I tucked the card into my bag, not trusting myself to speak. After dessert, I excused myself, stepping into the cool evening air. The cicadas buzzed loud against the quiet of the neighborhood. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to, the recycled card heavy in my purse beside me. In my apartment later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cheap card under the harsh glow of the overhead light. The sound of laughter from my family still echoed in my head. That night, staring at that recycled card, I realized this wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. And erasure demands a response. The next evening, we gathered at an upscale restaurant in Houston, a place lined with heavy curtains and polished wood where the servers floated about in black uniforms. My parents sat tall, almost glowing with pride, as if they owned the place, while Sofa Nisba scrolled through her phone, showing them pictures of her guest list. The moment I slid into my chair, I could sense the spotlight was fixed firmly on her. "This year we'll hit 200 guests," she announced, waving her phone like a trophy. "The Wilsons had 150 last year and everyone still talks about it. We'll do better." Father leaned back in his chair, voice booming so half the restaurant could hear. "Of course we'll do better. My daughter knows how to make an entrance." Mother chimed in, nodding. "Our family always sets the example." I stirred the ice in my water glass, the only drink without a stem, watching the reflection ripple. In my family, I'm not part of the show. I'm the stagehand, setting it all up, then stepping aside so they can bask in the applause. The waiter set down a platter of appetizers, and conversation swirled around me. My aunt leaned over, clapping her hands together with a laugh. "We couldn't do this without you, Alethea. You're basically the family's maid." Her words landed like a slap, masked as a smile. Everyone chuckled, assuming it harmless. Sofanisba smirked, tapping at her phone again. My face flushed hot, but I forced a practiced smile, the kind I wore at work when my boss made jokes at my expense. A maid, that's what I am to them, the one who sweeps up after the confetti falls. I wanted to correct her, to remind everyone how many bills I'd covered, how many nights I'd lost sleep for parties that weren't mine. But I knew exactly how it would play out. Laughter, dismissal, another reminder that I was too sensitive. So instead, I swallowed it whole and said nothing. I lifted my water glass, letting the ice clink against my teeth. "Sometimes the people you help the most are the first to forget you," I murmured to myself. But of course, no one was listening. The food kept coming, plates of steak and salmon dressed with herbs I couldn't pronounce. A server appeared at our table carrying a dessert plate with sparklers and a drizzle of chocolate spelling out my sister's name. "To celebrate the star of the evening," he said with a bow. Applause broke out around the table. My parents clapped proudly, beaming like they were royalty. No one looked at me. No one asked if I wanted dessert, if I wanted acknowledgement. I sat perfectly still, adding another tally mark in my mind. Overlooked again. Even strangers see her first. The sense of invisibility grew sharper, pressing into my chest like a pin. I looked around at the glowing candles, the crystal glasses reflecting golden light, and felt the quiet hollow where recognition should have been. When the time came to move from the lounge to the dining room, we walked through double doors into a long hall set with white tablecloths and polished silverware. Sofa Nisba strutted toward the head of the table, naturally claiming the center. My parents flanked her, smiling proudly. I glanced down the row of chairs, searching for my place card. I found it at the far end, right beside the swinging doors to the restroom. The smell of disinfectant drifted out each time the door opened, mingling with perfume and garlic. I pulled out my chair, feeling eyes follow me. A cousin snickered. "At least you'll be first in line when nature calls." Laughter erupted, bouncing across the table. I gripped the edge of the tablecloth so hard my knuckles whitened. My smile stayed fixed, but inside my thoughts were steel. When they place you next to the restroom, it isn't just bad seating. It's a message. You don't matter. You belong on the edge, half in the shadows, half forgotten. The meal carried on around me. Glasses clinked, forks scraped, jokes flew across the table. Every few minutes, the restroom door burst open, brushing my chair with air that reeked faintly of bleach. I sat quietly, hands folded, rehearsing lines I'd never speak aloud. Halfway through dessert, I pushed back my chair, feigning a buzz on my phone. "Excuse me, I need to take this." No one stopped me. No one asked if everything was all right. Outside, the night air hit cool against my face. I leaned against my car, phone dark in my hand, letting the laughter from inside muffle into the hum of traffic. That night, as I stood under the yellow glow of the street lamp, I understood it wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was a pattern, a system, and I was trapped inside it. When I got back to my apartment after the dinner at the restaurant, I didn't bother turning on the lights. The glow from the street lamp outside slipped through the blinds, striping the room with shadows. I tossed my bag on the counter, the recycled card from my mother sliding halfway out, mocking me. The silence pressed around me, so different from the constant chatter at the table earlier. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine, the kind I kept for nights when I needed something to quiet my thoughts. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the card, then at the unopened boxes in the corner of my living room. Old photo albums, scrapbooks, things I hadn't touched in years. My hand hovered for a moment before I pulled one box closer. Dust puffed into the air when I lifted the lid. "If they say my birthday isn't important," I whispered into the quiet, "maybe the proof has always been here." The saying rang in my mind. People may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That was the truth. My family made me feel like background noise, like a footnote in their perfect story. I remembered a night years ago in the kitchen. I had asked my mother timidly, trying to sound casual, "Can we plan something small for my birthday this year? Nothing big, maybe just dinner together?" She didn't even look up from the cake batter she was stirring. "It's not important, sweetheart. We're already exhausted after your sister's event." The words sliced through me then, and still did every time they replayed in my head. Not important. Two words that carried more weight than a shouted insult. I had stood there gripping the counter, waiting for her to soften, to add, "But of course we'll celebrate you too." That part never came. She slid the pan into the oven and hummed to herself while I felt the air leave my lungs. "Not important," I muttered now, sitting in my dim apartment, repeating it with anger that tasted metallic. That's what I've been to them all along. Many families in America play this game without even realizing, prioritizing one child's milestones over another's, brushing off birthdays, graduations, or even weddings because they don't fit the spotlight. And the child left behind learns to swallow it, year after year, until the silence becomes unbearable. I dug deeper into the box, pulling out an album with a cracked spine. The first pages were filled with Sofonisba's birthdays, balloons cascading across ceilings, cakes taller than my torso, rooms packed with smiling faces. Each page looked like a spread from a glossy magazine. When I flipped to the months surrounding my own birthday, the pages were blank. Or worse, there would be one blurry photo of me at the edge of a couch, no decorations, no candles, just me holding a cupcake someone had bought on the way home. I ran my finger along the empty spaces. Absence can scream louder than presence. The silence of those missing images was deafening. I thought about families I knew where every milestone, even small ones, had a place on the wall or a page in the book. Mine had left entire years blank, as though I hadn't even existed. The albums weren't just photo collections, they were records of who mattered, and I was nowhere in them. As I flipped another page, something caught my breath. A picture from Sofonisba's Sweet 16, a moment I remembered vividly. We had all stood together in the ballroom, sequins shining under the lights, my father insisting we gather for a family photo. In the original shot, I had been standing at the far left, trying to smile, even though I had been asked to hold everyone's purses moments before. The printed photo in the album looked different. I was missing. My sister centered in her gown, my parents glowing on either side of her, the image neatly cropped so the edges looked cleaner without me. I slammed the album shut for a moment, my chest tight, before forcing it open again. I traced the edges of the photo with my finger, my hands trembling. I remembered asking my father once, when I saw the framed version on the wall, "Why am I missing from this picture?" He had shrugged, casual as if it didn't matter. The crop looked cleaner. That excuse echoed in my head like a blade. Cropping wasn't about design, it was about deletion. Looking at it now, years later, I knew it hadn't been an accident. It was a statement. You don't belong here, not even in the frame. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the album and the recycled card lying side by side. Proof in paper and ink. Proof that I had been erased from birthdays, from photos, from memory. This wasn't neglect, I whispered to the empty room. It was deliberate. And if they can erase me from a picture, they can erase me from everything. The next week, I walked into my parents' house later than usual, on purpose. I wanted to see if anyone would notice, if they would look up from their piles of receipts and champagne brochures long enough to ask why I hadn't arrived on time. They didn't. The dining table was covered with stacks of vendor contracts, glossy catalogs, and a half-empty bottle of wine already poured for everyone but me. "Did you bring your checkbook?" my father asked casually, not even lifting his eyes from the seating chart in front of him. I slipped into my chair, folding my coat neatly over the back. "Of course," I said, my voice even. Inside, the words rang louder. "Here we go again. 10 years, same story." Mother passed me a platinum card with a flourish, setting it on top of a folder. "We'll need deposits placed by Friday. You know how these vendors book up." Father leaned back, laughing. "We'll pay you back, of course. You know how it is." The table chuckled. "She's always so reliable," my mother added, as if that explained everything. I ran my fingers over the edge of the card, remembering. The flowers I had covered one year, $4,000 out of my account, never reimbursed. The caterer I paid on my 22nd birthday while sitting alone at a restaurant, waiting for my friends who I had canceled on because the family needed me. Each promise had dissolved into the same silence. Promises don't feed bank accounts, I thought. The American saying floated in my mind. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 10 years. I looked at my father. He was scribbling notes, unconcerned, the picture of a man who assumed the world revolved in his favor. Anger simmered in my chest, steady and sharp. The piles of receipts grew higher, and my sister leaned over the table, laughing at a picture of a ballroom centerpiece. "We should start calling her our sponsor," she quipped, tilting her head toward me. The table erupted in laughter again. Even my aunt hid her smile behind a napkin. I pressed my lips together, keeping my hands flat on the table to steady myself. Sponsor, maid, planner, every word chipped away at the truth of who I was supposed to be. "They think it's a joke," I whispered to myself. "But this is my life savings." Sofonisba grinned. "Oh, don't look so serious. You know we appreciate you." Appreciation without action was just another empty promise. Dinner dragged into dessert, plates clattering, conversations weaving over one another. Just as I was preparing to excuse myself, my mother slipped an envelope across the table toward me. "An early birthday gift," she said, smiling, her tone light as if she were doing me a great kindness. I opened it and pulled out a flimsy plastic gift card from a discount chain store, the kind you pick up near a gas station counter. It was wrapped in thin paper, hastily taped at the edges. "It's just something small," she said quickly, brushing off the awkwardness. "We'll do more after Sofonisba's big night." My sister's smirk widened, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. I stared at the card in my hand, its cheap weight heavier than gold, my worth measured in scraps. Again, I fund their luxuries, but they hand me leftovers. "You shouldn't have," I murmured, my voice steady but cold. Father nodded approvingly. "See? She's grateful. Always so easygoing." Easygoing, grateful, invisible. I set the card down on the table without unwrapping it further. The room grew quiet for the first time that evening as I lifted my gaze from the useless gift and met each pair of eyes around the table. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I asked, my voice low but carrying. Chairs shifted, silverware clinked nervously against plates. Sofonisba rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. She's overreacting again." But no one laughed this time. The unease thickened, settling heavy between us. That was the first time I let my anger slip into words, and they weren't ready for it. The country club's lounge smelled faintly of polished wood and lilies, the kind of fragrance meant to whisper wealth. I pushed open the glass door and saw them already seated, my parents, Sofonisba, and 2 vendors, a florist and a caterer. The table was arranged with glossy brochures, mock-up menus, and color samples fanned out like a peacock's tail. My sister leaned back in her chair with a practiced smile, gesturing at an elaborate centerpiece in the florist's binder. This is what I want. Bigger, brighter. People should walk in and feel dazzled. My parents nodded along proudly. Father's laugh rolled through the room. You'll have it, princess. This year must outshine them all. As soon as I approached, someone shoved a stack of invoices into my hands. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Just paper, as if that was the only reason I had shown up. In their eyes, I'm not family. I'm staff. I slid into a chair at the far end, placing the papers neatly in front of me. The atmosphere sparkled with energy, but none of it touched me. A new vendor arrived, a man in a crisp suit carrying a leather folder. His eyes landed on me, the one with the paperwork. He smiled politely. "Excuse me," he said, lowering his voice as if to keep things professional. "Are you the planner? Where's the family?" Before I could speak, my sister laughed, tilting her head just enough for the pearls at her neck to glint. "Close enough. She basically works for us." The florist chuckled. The caterer grinned. Even father smirked as if the remark were clever. Heat rose to my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. "I am family." The vendor blinked, awkward now. "Oh, my apologies." The apology meant nothing. The damage had already sunk in. I caught my sister's smirk out of the corner of my eye. If even strangers see me as the help, what does that say about how my family treats me? The meeting moved forward, laughter and plans flowing, while I sat with the weight of those words pressing on me. As the florist spread out options for floral arches, I leaned forward and suggested gently, maybe scaling back the arrangements would save money. Tall vases instead of full arches. Sofonisba rolled her eyes. "Don't be so cheap. It's not your money." I froze, my hand resting on the corner of the invoice. My money had paid for more parties than I could count. The flowers, the DJs, the venues, always fronted by me. Father cleared his throat and smoothly shifted the conversation to champagne. "We'll need the premium brand. None of that grocery store nonsense." I pressed my lips together. The urge to speak, to call them out, burned hot in my chest, but I sat still, the words caged behind my teeth. My silence wasn't weakness this time. It was resolve hardening, taking shape. When the caterer asked about menus, I reached for my planner. It was thick, worn from years of receipts, notes, and details I had managed so carefully. I flipped through the pages, locating a contract we had discussed weeks earlier. Mother's sigh cut through the air. She leaned over, plucking the planner from my hands with a dismissive smile. "You and this notebook, always overthinking, always clinging to scraps." "Mom!" I started, but the sound of tearing paper drowned me out. She ripped a section out, laughing lightly as if she had just done something funny. "You don't need to keep all this." The tearing sound roared in my ears. Everyone chuckled, treating it like harmless banter, but my breath caught. She didn't just tear paper. She tore 10 years of my invisible work, my proof, my record of every hour and every dollar I had poured into making their dreams reality. She didn't just tear pages, she tore proof that I existed in this family's story. I reached forward, pulling the ripped pieces toward me. My hands trembled, but I gathered them carefully, smoothing the edges as if the paper could still be saved. The room's laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. I looked up, meeting their eyes one by one. My voice was calm, sharp, and colder than I had ever allowed it to be. "You think this is funny," I said, laying the torn pages flat in front of me. "But one day, you'll wish you hadn't treated me this way." The silence deepened. Even Sofonisba, so quick with her barbs, shifted uncomfortably. That was the first time I stopped hiding my anger, and it scared them. When I closed my apartment door that night after the country club debacle, I didn't bother turning on the television or radio. The silence pressed around me, heavier than the planner my mother had ripped apart. My small living room looked like it always did, modest, cluttered with unopened envelopes and scraps of notes from years of party planning. For the first time, the quiet felt like both punishment and refuge. I dropped my bag by the couch and let out a long breath. The lamp on the end table cast a dim glow across the papers scattered on my coffee table. vendor lists, seating arrangements, receipts that never seemed to end. I sat down and pressed my palms flat against the table, as though holding myself steady. If they won't see me, maybe I need someone who does. My phone lay face down. I reached for it, my thumb hovering over the screen. The only person I wanted to hear right now was Valmai, my aunt, the one who never forgot. She had been the only one who ever remembered my birthday, year after year, with a simple card or call. I dialed her number, my pulse quickening as the line rang. "Alethea?" Her voice was warm, alive even through the static. "It's late. Are you all right?" I swallowed. Do you remember my birthday?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course I do. I always have. You've mattered to me since the day you were born." The words cracked something in me. My throat tightened, my eyes burning hot. "I wasn't sure anyone did anymore," I whispered. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "I used to send you little cards, remember? Even when no one else bothered. I'd walk to the post office myself just to make sure you got something." I closed my eyes, picturing the cards, bright envelopes tucked between bills, each one a lifeline in years when no one else seemed to notice me. "Blood may be thicker than water," she added softly, "but love is thicker than both. Don't forget that." Tears slid down my face, but beneath them I felt a fire flicker. She was my anchor, the one steady voice in a sea of neglect. "You don't know how much that means," I managed, my voice shaking. "I do," Valmai said, "and I want you to hold on to it. You are not invisible to everyone." When we hung up, I sat in the dim room, holding the phone in my lap. For the first time in days, the anger inside me settled into something sharper, clearer. I pulled out my journal from the drawer and opened it to a blank page. I wrote down every slight, every birthday forgotten, every deposit I had been forced to cover. The ink bled dark against the paper, each word another piece of evidence. If one person can remember me, then I know I exist. I matter. My handwriting grew steadier as I wrote. The fire inside spread, warming places I thought had gone cold. My silence would no longer be their tool. The next morning, I sat at my office desk, sipping lukewarm coffee while coworkers chatted about weekend plans. My inbox pinged again and again until the vibration rattled against the wood. When I finally clicked open the new messages, I froze. The subject line glared back. "Need you to confirm catering for Sofanisba. Timestamped. My birthday morning. No happy birthday. No acknowledgement. Just another demand. Another task shoved onto my plate." I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My lips parted in a humorless laugh. "They didn't even say it," I whispered to myself. "Not even once." Around me, coworkers swapped stories, one about a surprise breakfast her husband had made, another about her kids leaving notes on the fridge. Their voices blurred, highlighting the silence in mine. "Actions speak louder than words," I muttered, and their actions couldn't be clearer. My hands clenched around the edge of the desk. Humiliation sharpened into something fiercer. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity wrapped in rage. I hovered my cursor over reply, then stopped. For the first time, I resisted the instinct to obey. My finger slid down to delete. I sat there, staring at the empty inbox, my chest rising and falling. My hand trembled, but it wasn't weakness. It was release. That was the moment I knew. I could disappear from their duties, and they would finally feel my absence. Sunday morning sunlight poured through the lace curtains in my parents' dining room, turning the white tablecloth into a glowing canvas. The air smelled of bacon, maple syrup, and the tang of fresh squeezed orange juice mixed into the mimosas. To anyone walking in, it looked like a perfect family gathering, polished, welcoming, familiar. But I could feel the tension wrapped around the edges like a silent thread, tugging at me with every smile. I sat at the far end of the table, cradling my coffee cup while voices floated above me. Relatives chattered, cousins compared vacations, neighbors had been invited too, filling every chair. My parents beamed as compliments began to flow. "This is so impressive," my uncle said, gesturing at the floral arrangements in the foyer. "The organization, the attention to detail. You all really know how to put things together." "Everything looks grand," another relative added. "You must be so proud seeing your daughter handle all this." My mother's lips curled into a smile. "Yes, Sophonisba really inherited my sense of organization. She's been so responsible." I froze, my coffee turning bitter in my mouth. I recognized every detail they praised. The arrangements had been my calls, my vendor confirmations, my late nights juggling spreadsheets. But my name wasn't spoken, only hers. When my father stood, raising his glass of champagne, the chatter dimmed. He cleared his throat with authority. "To my daughter Sophonisba," he declared, looking down the table as if the toast were a coronation, "for being so responsible in handling everything for this year's celebration." The room burst into applause. Guests clinked glasses, smiles flashed, and all eyes turned toward my sister, who sat poised like royalty. She gave a practiced wave, lowering her lashes modestly. "It's nothing," she said. "I just enjoy making things perfect." The false humility struck harder than arrogance. Applause swelled again, feeding her smile. I sat motionless, hearing only the echo of my own voice inside. They don't just erase me, they replace me with her. The memory of nights spent hunched over my laptop rose in my throat, emailing vendors past midnight, adjusting seating charts when RSVPs shifted, fixing mistakes no one else even noticed. My sister's responsibility had been delivered by my hands. I pressed my nails into my palm beneath the table. Around me, relatives praised her, and not one of them saw the fire building behind my smile. When I finally parted my lips to speak, to correct the narrative even slightly, a cousin cut across me with a loud laugh. "Tell us about the cake design." The subject swerved instantly, my words swallowed before they left my throat. Sophonisba leaned forward, describing flavors as though she'd masterminded every detail. Chocolate mousse, vanilla tears, sugared flowers, choices she hadn't even been present for when I finalized them. "You always think of everything," an aunt cooed, patting her arm. "It's a gift, really." My fists tightened in my lap. My sister met my gaze briefly, her eyes sharp even as her lips curved sweetly for the crowd. She knew exactly what she was doing, accepting credit that had never belonged to her, reveling in the spotlight that was built on my shadow. I forced myself to swallow my words, saving them. The anger wasn't weakness anymore. It was ammunition. Later, I escaped to the kitchen, setting my glass down harder than I meant to. The hum of conversation from the dining room softened into background noise as I leaned against the counter. Two voices drifted from the corner near the pantry, hushed, but not enough. "She's just bitter," one said. I recognized my cousin's tone. "Always jealous of her sister's success," another agreed, low and conspiratorial. "That's why she helps so much. She wants attention." My chest clenched. I stayed hidden, my hand tightening around the counter edge. Their whispers cut deeper than the applause. Not only had my credit been stripped, but my motives had been twisted. Not only do they steal my work, but they poison my name. I could see it already, the way rumors spread like wildfire at family gatherings. Jealousy, bitterness, the narrative rewritten until even outsiders believed it. I pushed off the counter, my pulse thudding in my ears. Whispers are knives. You don't see the wound, but you bleed all the same. When I stepped outside onto the porch for fresh air, the laughter and clinking glasses still carried through the open windows. But it was the whispers that echoed louder inside me. I gripped the railing, staring at the yard where kids tossed a football, their carefree shouts clashing with the storm raging in my chest. If they insisted on painting me as jealous, then maybe it was time I showed them what real defiance looked like. By the time I walked into my parents' living room, it already felt like a courtroom. The chairs had been rearranged into neat rows, extended relatives sitting stiffly as though they'd been summoned for a verdict. My mother perched at one end of the sofa, pearls gleaming against her throat. Father stood near the mantel, holding a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched. Sophonisba lounged comfortably in an armchair, sipping champagne as if she were the hostess of the entire affair. When I stepped inside, Father's voice cut across the hush. "We need you to step up." Again. It wasn't a request. It was the same command I'd heard 1,000 times before, dressed in the thin disguise of family obligation. I sat slowly, setting my bag on my lap. My sister smirked over the rim of her glass, and the glint in her eyes told me this wasn't just a meeting, it was an ambush. They called this gathering to put me back in line, but I didn't come here to serve. As the chatter died down, my aunt, slipped into the room quietly. She caught my eye, her expression calm but firm. Without a word, she handed me an envelope she'd been holding close to her chest. I opened it, fingers trembling. Inside was a copy of my grandmother's old will, aged paper, her neat cursive still intact. My eyes skimmed the lines, and my heart clenched. I had once been promised a share of property, a slice of inheritance that acknowledged my place in this family. The revised version, I knew, had erased me completely. I rose to my feet, the room shifting uncomfortably as I spoke. "You told me my birthday wasn't important," I began, my voice steady, carrying across the room. I held up the paper for all to see. Turns out my inheritance wasn't either. Gasps rippled across the relatives. My father's jaw tightened. "It was for the good of the family," he stammered. Mother added quickly, "You don't understand the bigger picture." "No," I said sharply. "I understand perfectly. My erasure wasn't an accident. It was intentional." The betrayal burned hot, but beneath it was a new clarity. For the first time, I saw every slight not as carelessness but as a choice. I reached into my bag and pulled out my thick planner, the same one they mocked, filled with a decade of receipts, notes, and careful records. I slammed it onto the coffee table, papers scattering across the polished wood. The sound cracked through the silence like a gavel. 10 years of checks, 10 years of promises, 10 years erased. The relatives leaned forward, eyes darting to the papers spread across the table. Catering deposits, floral invoices, contracts in my handwriting. Proof that every detail had been carried by me. Mother gave a tight laugh, her voice brittle. "Honestly, Alethea, don't be dramatic. You always kept too many notes. It's not healthy to cling." I turned on her with icy calm. "This isn't clinging. This is proof. You built your parties on my labor, and then you erased me from the story." The room froze. The weight of my words hung heavy, undeniable. Voices erupted, relatives breaking into arguments. Some defended my parents, muttering about tradition and duty. Others whispered in disbelief, pointing at the receipts scattered like confetti. Sofonisba scoffed, tossing her hair. "You're just bitter because I'm the star. Admit it. You've always been jealous." I faced her fully, my voice low and sharp. "Stars burn out when no one fuels them. I've been your fuel." Her smirk faltered. The line landed heavy, cutting through the noise. For once, she didn't have a ready retort. The room quieted, the tension peaking. I bent down, gathering my planner and tucking the torn pages back into it with deliberate care. Then I stood tall, meeting every gaze in the room. "If you wanted a servant," I said clearly, "you should have hired one. I'm done." The silence that followed was absolute. My parents' faces drained of color, the authority they had wielded for decades broken in a single moment. I turned toward the door, planner in hand, and walked out without waiting for their reply. That evening, I stayed home. Instead of rushing to a ballroom or fielding frantic phone calls, I chose stillness. My small porch creaked under my chair as I leaned back with a glass of red wine, the crickets buzzing in the Houston suburbs louder than any music my family might have planned. The sky turned a deep indigo, and I let the quiet wash over me. For once, I wanted them to face a night without me, without the safety net I'd been for a decade. The saying circled my mind. Sometimes absence speaks louder than presence. I sipped slowly, the cool night air pressing against my skin, while across town, cars began pulling into the grand drive of the country club. Guests in gowns and tailored suits stepped out, their expectations high, their chatter about champagne fountains and dazzling decor. None of them knew that the hands that had always held the strings, mine, were no longer pulling. When the first guests walked through the wide double doors of the ballroom, confusion immediately spread. The chandeliers glowed above bare tables, no linens, no flowers, no food trays lined up, just rows of empty chairs and a stale smell of cleaning solution. "Are we in the wrong place?" a woman in a sequined dress whispered. "This looks abandoned," another muttered, clutching her clutch purse closer. Staff milled about uncertainly, explaining they hadn't been booked for an event that night. The guest list grew restless, voices rising as realization spread. At precisely 7 o'clock, Sofonisba made her entrance. Her gown shimmered gold under the lights, her smile wide as she expected applause. Instead, she froze at the sight of the barren room. "What is this?" she hissed, turning toward my parents. My father's face blanched. He fumbled for his phone, calling vendors, his voice cracking. "What do you mean no deposit was received?" "We confirmed weeks ago." My mother's hands trembled as she dialed another number. "There has to be some mistake. My daughter's party. This is her 30th. People are waiting." But every response was the same. No deposits, no bookings, nothing secured. Guests whispered louder, pulling out phones, some already recording the spectacle. The Matthews' perfect image was unraveling in real time, and the humiliation painted every corner of the ballroom. Back on my porch, I closed my eyes and pictured it. That night, my silence became the loudest voice I'd ever had. Some guests began leaving quietly, murmuring excuses about early mornings. Others stayed, gossip spilling across the room. "This is a disaster," one relative whispered to another. "I heard they cut corners this year. Guess the truth shows," came the reply. Within minutes, photos and comments sprouted online. Hashtags mocked the Matthews family. Videos of the empty hall racked up views. Relatives avoided eye contact, the embarrassment secondhand but heavy. My father attempted to rally, announcing that the celebration would be moved to their home. But the conviction was gone from his voice, and the crowd dispersed anyway. In small-town and suburban America, reputation is currency, and that night, theirs plummeted. While chaos unfolded downtown, my phone buzzed with a message from a cousin. "Did you like the necklace?" it read. I frowned, typing back, "What necklace?" There was a pause before the reply came. "Your sister was wearing it tonight. I assumed it was the one I sent, for you." My stomach dropped. Even the gift meant for me had been rerouted. Later, another cousin confirmed it face to face. "I picked out that necklace thinking of you, Alethea. But when I handed it over, your mother said she'd pass it along. Tonight I saw it around Sofonisba's neck." The words stung. Even in collapse, even as their world cracked, they still found ways to erase me. I remembered my cousin's awkward laugh. Maybe it was just a mix-up. But I knew better. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. Proof, again, that my existence was always minimized, my worth siphoned away to elevate her. I sat back in my porch chair, shutting my eyes as the night deepened. The sounds of distant cars faded, leaving only the soft hum of cicadas. My anger, once raw and blistering, cooled into clarity. For once, humiliation was mutual. It wasn't just me who bore it quietly. This time, they had tasted the emptiness too. For once, they felt what I had lived with for years, emptiness where love should have been. The days after the ruined ballroom party were a blur of whispers and shame that clung to my family like smoke. Everywhere I went in town, I caught fragments of conversation, the Matthews name spoken with raised eyebrows and pitying shakes of the head. My parents scrambled to patch the cracks, sending out messages, inviting relatives for a follow-up dinner at their house to explain away what had happened. I knew why they wanted me there, not because they valued my presence, but because they still hoped I'd clean up their mess. I drove over reluctantly, the pit in my stomach heavy as stone. The driveway was already full, and through the windows I saw shadows moving, glasses clinking, voices raised in forced cheer. When I entered, the chatter dimmed. A cousin looked away quickly, her face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. My father stepped forward, his smile too wide, too brittle. "There she is," he said, clapping his hands together. "The one who makes all this possible." I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap, my mind clear. They wanted me here to save face, but all I bring tonight is truth. Midway through the dinner, my father asked an old friend of the family, Mr. Harris, to stand and say a few words. He cleared his throat, grinning as he gestured to the head of the table. "And of course," he said, "we must thank the real brains behind all these parties, our reliable planner." His eyes landed on me. "What's her name again?" A ripple of laughter moved through the room. My cheeks burned as if I were a stranger at my own family's table. "Isn't she the one who books everything?" another guest added. "Basically staff, right?" I glanced at my sister, waiting for her to correct them, but she only sipped her wine and smirked, letting the lie hang in the air like a banner. I straightened my back, pressing my palms into my knees to steady myself. The room laughed lightly, but the sting ran deep. Even here, even now, my name erased, my identity replaced. The toast went on, but I barely heard it. The voices blurred into a drone of praise for my sister, nods of approval for my parents. My anger didn't flare outward this time. It simmered, controlled, waiting. Then came the shift. A vendor who had been invited leaned forward, his tone hesitant. "I don't mean to pry," he said carefully, "but we've all heard about the empty ballroom." A hush fell. Another relative jumped in. "Yes, what exactly happened? People drove in from out of town. How were deposits not handled?" My father's face glistened with sweat. He dabbed at his forehead with a napkin, his voice faltering. "There were miscommunications. The vendors must have made errors." The florist, sitting 3 chairs away, spoke firmly. "With respect, we never received confirmation. Not a deposit, not a callback, nothing." My father's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. "Well, these things happen." The room buzzed with doubt, relatives whispering behind their hands. I stayed silent, watching the cornered look in his eyes. My quiet pressed on him harder than words. I remembered a saying I'd once read: "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." Tonight, misery was written all over his face. Finally, it snapped. My father slammed his palm against the table, startling everyone. His voice cracked with frustration. "We knew she was always paying," he shouted, pointing at me. "It was easier that way. She never complained." The words ricocheted across the room, hanging in the stunned silence that followed. My mother's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't deny it. My sister looked away, suddenly fascinated by the rim of her glass. I sat frozen, my chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. There it was, proof I wasn't forgotten. I was exploited. Every unpaid bill, every erased birthday, every humiliation, they hadn't been oversights, they had been choices. Convenient choices, made at my expense. The relatives stared, some wide-eyed, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of betrayal was no longer invisible. It was carved into the air, undeniable. I rose slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through the thick silence. I didn't need to shout. My voice came low, steady, cold. "You admitted it," I said. "That's all I ever needed to hear." A murmur rippled through the room. Some relatives looked at me differently now, not with pity, but with recognition. Respect. I gathered my bag and straightened my shoulders. For the first time, the truth was on record, and they couldn't erase me anymore. After my father's outburst, I went silent. For days, I ignored the buzzing of my phone, leaving it in the drawer where its vibrations sounded like the heartbeat of something I no longer wanted to keep alive. The quiet was deliberate. I let their voices pile up in voicemail, their text messages stack like unopened bills. I cooked for myself, sat by the window in the evenings with a book, and felt something shift. If silence is the only language they gave me, I'll speak it back louder. The world outside carried on as usual. The neighbors mowed their lawns, children rode bikes in the fading light. But inside my apartment, I withdrew, not out of weakness, but to gather strength. Many people think silence is surrender. For me, it was preparation. My absence was its own kind of declaration. By the end of the week, I packed a small bag and left the city. I didn't tell my parents, didn't answer my sister's endless calls. Valmy knew, a few friends too, but the rest of the family was left to stew in uncertainty. I drove toward the coast, checked into a small inn, and let myself disappear. Each morning, I walked along the beach with sand cold under my feet, the wind lifting my hair. The rhythm of the waves was steady, unlike the chaos I had left behind. Over coffee one morning, I called Valmai. "They'll only notice I'm gone when they can't use me anymore," I told her. Her voice was steady. Sometimes absence is the sharpest boundary. The truth of her words cut clean. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because the past had changed, but because I had removed myself from its grip. The rebellion wasn't loud or dramatic. It was my absence, a void they couldn't control. I breathed in freedom like salt air, knowing it was only a preview of what my life could become if I kept walking away. When I returned days later, the peace clung to me like armor. My apartment door wasn't even fully closed before I realized I wasn't alone. My parents sat stiffly on the couch, and Sofonisba lounged in my favorite chair, arms folded, face sharp with disdain. "Where have you been?" my mother demanded. "You just left," my father said, his voice rising. "No call, no explanation." Sofonisba leaned forward. "Do you know how humiliated we were? People were asking where you'd gone, whispering about our family falling apart. You made us look pathetic." I set my bag down carefully, then looked at her evenly. "Now you understand me." The words cut through the room. For once, they had no quick response. I moved to the center of the room, feeling the line draw itself under my feet. "This ends tonight," I said. My voice was calm, measured, but unyielding. My parents exchanged glances. Father tried first, his tone wobbling. "Alethea, we all said things we didn't mean. Families fight, but we can move on." "No," I interrupted. "This isn't about a fight. This is about how I've been treated my entire life." Mother's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't survive without family. Don't talk as though you're above us." I shook my head slowly. "Either respect me or lose me. This is not a threat. It's a choice." My sister scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, you're being dramatic. You'll come crawling back. You always do." I walked to the entryway table, opened the drawer, and took out the spare set of keys they still had to my apartment. I held out my hand. "Give them back." Father blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious." I didn't flinch. "I am." Mother fumbled in her purse, her movements jerky. When the keys dropped into my palm, the weight of them felt like chains slipping off. Cold clarity filled me. No more begging, no more pleading. This was my line, and I had drawn it in stone. I opened the door wide, the night air brushing against my face. "We're done here," I said simply. For a moment, none of them moved. Then, slowly, my parents rose, disbelief written on their faces. My sister shot me one last sneer before storming past me. I closed the door behind them and turned the lock with steady hands. The apartment was quiet again, but this silence wasn't lonely. It was mine. For the first time, I didn't fear losing them, because I had finally found myself. A year later, my apartment looked nothing like the place where I had once sat alone with a recycled card and an aching heart. Twinkling lights draped across the walls, their glow warm against framed photos I had chosen, moments with people who truly saw me. The air smelled of vanilla cake, the sound of laughter spilling from friends gathered in every corner of the room. Valmai handed me a neatly wrapped gift, her eyes crinkling with genuine joy. I held it carefully, overwhelmed by the simple fact that it was mine, meant for me, thought out with intention. For the first time, my birthday felt like it belonged to me, not an afterthought, not erased. I looked around at the decorations, the glasses clinking, the people smiling because they wanted to be here. The contrast was sharp. No empty promises, no staged applause, just presence, just love. For the first time, my birthday feels like mine. After dinner, my friends raised their glasses in a toast. "To Alethea," one said, voice steady, "for surviving what most people wouldn't have had the strength to endure, and for building something beautiful out of it." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat refusing to ease. Valmai leaned toward me. "You broke the cycle, Alethea. That's not small. That's legacy." I laughed softly, shaking my head. It doesn't feel grand, it just feels right. She smiled knowingly. That's the point. Healing doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it looks like a cake with your name spelled correctly. On the counter, the cake waited, frosted neatly with "Happy Birthday, Alethea." Just seeing my name and icing made my chest ache with gratitude. Sometimes you don't get the family you deserve, a friend said quietly, but you build one. I raised my glass. And sometimes that's even better. We clinked glasses, laughter following, filling the room with something richer than any ballroom ever had. Word had spread across Houston over the past year. The Matthews name never recovered from that empty ballroom night. Relatives whispered about it in church pews. Neighbors recounted it at block parties. People still talk about the empty ballroom, one cousin admitted to me months later. It's unforgettable in the worst way. Sophonisba's social glow dimmed, her credibility slipping with each story retold. My parents, once proud of their standing, now walked into community events with lowered eyes. It was poetic. They had wanted perfection, but what lingered was humiliation, the same humiliation I had carried for decades. Only now, it was theirs to bear. They lived with the weight of their choices, and for once, it wasn't mine to carry. Standing in my living room, I traced my finger along the photo frames on the wall. Pictures from tonight already joined the others. Friends singing, Valmai lighting candles, me smiling without restraint. Proof that I existed, that I mattered. I thought revenge would be loud, I said, turning back to my friends. Turns out it's living well. One of them chuckled. And making them watch. We laughed together, the sound full and unforced. I caught my reflection in the window, shoulders squared, posture strong, eyes clear. The girl who had once been invisible was gone. What remained was a woman unshakable. The girl they called invisible is gone. This woman is unshakable. When the cake was brought to the table, the candles flickered softly in the dimmed lights. My friends gathered close, their voices blending into a familiar song. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and felt the weight of every erased birthday lift. They said my birthday wasn't important, but this life I built, that's the most important thing of all. I blew out the candles, laughter and cheers surrounding me. And in that moment, I knew. Even if they tried to erase me again, the world already knew I existed, and I would never disappear.